Yo ho ho, ladies and gentlemen. It is yet another Hidden History Happy Hour Daring Do at Sea episode. Welcome back, my friend.
Hey, buddy, how are you? In the honor of this episode, your favorite animal, the kraken, I'm gonna crack open some rum.
Absolutely. I've already preloaded my Kraken. Kraken rum, by the way, everybody, not the best rum in the world, but it's serviceable and it's got one of the coolest logos, which is also our logo, if you can see on my little glass there. Not the same, there's no IP issues, but similar. Anyway, cheers.
Cheers. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. We have count them, two ships at sea stories for you today. But first of all, little public service that we're trying to add to the show. We're trying to not only teach you about some fun stories from Alex's two books, Lessons from History, which I'm showing our viewers right now by way of reminder, and the cleverly named More Lessons from History I'm showing. Alex has his as well, of course. But also just deliver some history news. I know it seems like an oxymoron, history news, but it's not. So, as Alex knows, before the show, I pulled from the interwebs big events in history that happened in August, thinking, hey, let's tie one into our stories. So, the one I found that we're going to talk about is called the Ship of Gold story. Now, Alex, what I didn't realize even 2 hours ago when I mentioned this to you is this has an incredible connection to Seattle, Washington, where I live. So I'm just going to read briefly from a couple paragraphs of a story that appeared in the Seattle Times, August 4th, 2019. Seattle Group helped find 15 tons of gold lost on sunken ship, but it took 30 years to get their share. So here's the story. Few have heard of the SS Central America, but it has an important place in history because of what happened over 3 days beginning in September 9th of 1857. Now you might say, that's not August, but they left port in August. They wrecked in September of 1857. The steamship sinking off the Carolinas in a hurricane with 105-mile-per-hour winds stands as this country's worst passenger ship peacetime disaster. Of the 578 aboard, 425 perished.
Gosh.
It also has been called the world's richest shipwreck because it carried 3 tons of gold commercially shipped from the California gold rush, and perhaps an equal amount of gold being carried by the passengers. There were rumors of another 15 tons of gold in a secret army ship. And now, for those of you who haven't studied the history of gold in the United States, gold, physical gold, for most of our history was the basis of our entire currency and our fiscal stability as a country. So when the SS Central America went down, it created a massive panic and a depression inside the United States. So ship disappears. Even in the blurb I pulled up a couple hours ago, Alex, the ship was just sailed into oblivion. But the update is that a bunch of engineers and technicians and owners of high-end solar equipment in Seattle went in search of the SS Central America in 1988, and they were promised a share of the wreck's bounty in return. Well, they found the ship some 160 miles off the South Carolina coast, 7,200 feet on the ocean floor. And it only took them 30 years of litigation to get their share, which finally arrived to them in February of 2019 after
Wow.
after litigation, Alex, reminiscent of Jarndyce v. Jarndyce.
Yeah,
And
it's a Dickens reference. Yeah.
yes, Bleak House, I believe. And the person who ripped them off actually went to jail over it, in part because he refused to talk about where all the gold that was supposedly on the ship, but didn't make it to the surface, air quotes, was. And the last thing I'll say about this is this is just great because I love when judges are creative. And Alex and I are both recovering lawyers. So one of the judges in this litigation, upon hearing about how the cases had dragged through the judicial system, involving not just the Seattle area litigants, but 161 investors who funded the search, ended his opinion thinking it was appropriate to quote from Virgil's epic Latin poem, the Aeneid. The opinion concludes, quote, "O cursed lust for gold," close quote.
Yes. Well, it's a great story, and you put me in mind of the Vasa, which you and I visited together in Stockholm.
Yeah.
And um, the reason, first of all, is obviously very wealthy boat sinking was the connection. But I had complete. I thought there were lots of people involved in the sinking of casualties. I mean, in the sinking of the Vasa, and I just looked it up while you were telling that great story, and I was completely wrong. Thousands of people were on the shore watching the maiden voyage when it sank, but for fatalities, casualties were under 30. So, of course, that sank with a huge number of a huge amount of gold and wealth on it as well. Maybe not
Right.
gold, but a huge amount of wealth on it as well. And the reason that ship sank was that they'd had their gun ports were open to fire a salute, and the ship was so top heavy it blew about in the swell and just promptly took on so much water it sank on its maiden. I shouldn't laugh. Dozens at least of people died, so it's not that funny, but it is also a bit funny. So that you put me in mind of that. Why don't I tell the shipwreck story first then?
Do it.
All right. This is from More Lessons from History, my second history book, and it's the story of the white ship. You told the gold ship. This is the white ship, and the ramifications of this sinking plunged my country into civil war. England, that is, the United Kingdom didn't exist at the time. So, backstory: William the Conqueror. He had a bunch of sons, certainly enough to make nuisance amongst themselves after his death. He was succeeded on the English throne by his son William Rufus, because his eldest son Robert took what was presumably the more attractive part of the legacy, which was Normandy, not my country. No offense taken. And soon enough, it was ever so unfortunate, William Rufus met with a hunting accident. And his brother Henry, who just happened to be present at that unfortunate hunting accident, promptly became king, seizing the throne as Henry I of England. Brother Robert didn't like this, and so Robert from Normandy promptly invaded England with an army to press his case, but he was rebuffed. And there was a negotiated settlement which left Henry on the throne, which was meant to prevent familial conflicts anymore, meaning more shedding of British and continental blood. And that worked until a couple of years later, when Henry invaded back and defeated Robert in battle, and therefore took control of Normandy as well of England. And Henry kept his brother Robert prisoner for the rest of his life. So, I mean, we've got a truce now. Everything's fixed. Don't you worry, brother, until I've marshaled my forces. And he comes back, takes the land, takes the kingdom, and never released him again. So, happy family, this is not. Anyway, so Robert's son periodically tries to take back Normandy. The French, bear in mind, Normandy's not part of France at this point. The French throne is helping Robert's son, mischief making against the English as always, or Normans at that time. Effectively, Henry was happily back in control on both sides of the Channel thereafter, and he was quite often to be found with his entourage in Normandy, the, I suppose, more sophisticated end of the kingdom. And at the end of one such happy trip, this is 1120, so a little while ago, a nautical man named Thomas Fitzstephen pays a visit to the king, and we don't have it verbatim, but I paraphrase. Sire, my father served your father all his days. Let me likewise serve you. I've kitted out my ship. It's white, and you'll never guess what I've called it. And it's got all the mod cons, just what you'll need for your trip back to England. Well, of course, Henry was a king, and he'd already got his travel sorted out. But he had a big bunch of courtiers and family around who thought, well, free trip to England in a nice ship, why not? We'll go on the newly pimped out white ship. And among them was William Adelin, who was Henry's son and heir. That's foreshadowing, important pause.
Yeah.
So naturally, Fitzstephen wanted to impress his royal passengers. William had a considerable chunk of the court with him. William Adelin, the son, had a considerable chunk of the court with him, and they had some considerable appetites. So whilst they were still docked in the harbour at Balfleur at this point, in Barfleur, the call goes up for more booze to be delivered. And rather than thinking we'll get the booze and then set sail, they had a pre-launch party, and they got, I mean, to any people who are listening who are yachties or sailors, this may not be a completely unfamiliar concept. They got properly stuck in, including, I'm afraid, the crew. And so they were absolutely steaming. And I think you can probably see where the story is going, even if I hadn't given it away with with making the point about the sinking. So the revelry was sufficiently strong that Stephen of Blois, I was once at a party where someone overcooked it so much they had to leave before the party basically started. But Stephen of Blois was so hammered that he got off the ship before the voyage even started. He was a grandson of William the Conqueror as well, which is very good luck for Stephen of Blois, as it turned out, because unlike the others aboard, he lived and went on to become King of England. Anyway, anchors away, cast off, set sail. Let's get this party started. Off with the voyage. Well, hey, Southampton awaits. They lasted a couple of minutes. There is a rock outside Barfleur, excuse me, I don't know why I keep getting that wrong. I've only just had a sip of the rum. There is a rock called Quillebeuf. It's just outside the harbour. It's largely submerged, but you can see it. Look, it's well known enough to have a bloody name, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose in the inadequate defence of the crew that promptly smashed into it and sank, it is submerged to a part. And then the people were trapped in the rigging as it came down. People were trapped below the decks as the ship started to sink. People were concussed and thrown into the water unconscious. Long and awful story short, everybody dies except a butcher who clings onto the rock all night. And I suppose it's from the butcher that we know this, that William had, in popular telling at least, escaped the ship. And so the son and heir is in a lifeboat, and he hears his half sisters crying from within the wreckage or on the wreckage, don't know. And he orders the boat to be turned round to try to rescue her. And the wreckage is enormous and it's full of ropes and it tangles up their ship and it's buffeted by the waves, promptly sinks their lifeboat, and he drowns in his attempt to save his half sister. Fitzwilliam, the unfortunate mariner that I mentioned, the owner of the ship, whose father, by the way, had sailed William the Conqueror to England in 1066. That's the connection, that's the legacy. Fitzstephen, again, I suppose, according to this butcher, lucky Johnny on the spot, makes it to this rock. And he hears that the heir to the throne has gone down with the ship. And he thinks, what would I rather do here? And he turned back to the waters and let himself sink beneath the waves rather than have to face his king and tell him what had happened on his watch. And the poets tell us that from the moment that the news of this disaster was brought unto him, the king was never known to smile again. William's death left the question of monarchic succession open to challenge again, because Henry was left without a male heir. And recent history had shown them, if there was just the tiniest sliver of a legitimate claim to the throne, somebody is going to make it. And seized upon it was by Stephen of Blois, the lucky ultra boozer who got off the ship before it even started on its journey. Upon Henry's death in 1135, he challenged the right of Henry's daughter Matilda to reign, and my country entered into a 2-decade-long period of civil war. And we're not unaccustomed to a bit of conflict, but this lawlessness was so bad, it was known to the history books 900 years on. It's still known as the Anarchy. That was only brought to an end by Stephen agreeing with an opposing army present to help him make up his mind in this direction, to recognise Matilda's son as the heir to the throne upon his death, rather than his own son succeeding him. So Matilda herself lost out, but her bloodline prevailed, as Stephen died the year after the deal was done, and that deal was honoured. Anyway, my point is 2 decades of civil war took place after this sinking. That's quite a price to pay for a harbour party. So lessons to draw. Well, here's a couple of starter attempts. 1, don't drink and sail. I know a lot of people aren't going to listen to that, but really, don't drink and sail. And 2, if a rock has a name, you really should know it's there.
Fair. Listen, this is such a great story. I'm actually shocked that it took us till episode 79 or whatever it is, season 3, episode 5, whatever we're on, to come up with it. But I have a couple of observations about the really tremendous story. One is, in terms of historical longevity, it's remarkable that the PR firm that came up with the name of the White Ship
Yeah.
live today to come up with more lessons from
More
history.
lessons from history. You sod.
And they've stayed quiet for so many centuries. Second thing is, I could be overinterpreting it and we'll never know. But there's a version of this story that without these events, then most of my favorite Shakespeare plays and all of my favorite Shakespeare movies would never have been made. Because the fight of the Henrys,
Oh,
went
no, well, no, that's later. So this isn't Henry four, five, six. This is Henry one. So
right.
you're
But
up in the 1100s here.
yeah,
Oh,
but
and the
maybe there
numbering might
never
be
would have
different,
been a
but
4, 5, 6 if there wasn't a one. They certainly would have been numbered differently. I think we can agree.
that's like I certainly give you that. But potentially, although funnily enough, I suppose had the bloodline continued, then another Henry might have. Anyway, I take your point.
Understood. And what was the name of the I'm going to say able seaman because that's our tradition, but the person who brought the king over and then failed on the way back, who was that again?
Yeah, Fitzstephen, Thomas Fitzstephen, and his the connection was, and these times of family serving generation after generation. His father had taken the conqueror to England from Normandy in 1066, and then so of course he finds their King Henry in Normandy, going back to England. Says, wouldn't it be nice if? And here's my beautiful ship, and you really must take this pimped out ride." And it was obviously a marketing exercise, but one that did not go very well.
So just in his defense, I will simply say, in American
Okay, I got to hear
baseball,
this. All right.
if you're batting 500, you're in the Hall of Fame. So the family batted 500 in terms of that round trip.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, actually, technically, I suppose it was two single journeys, and the second one didn't go so well. But I take your point. And if you give them the few feet they got out of Barfleur before the sinking, it's 500.1 or something.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is we could talk about this story for hours, but it kind of fits in with my pet project that we've talked about for years that someone really should write a book about the history of booze in important historical events. Now, I will tell our viewers and readers, I'll give a little foreshadowing. I'm on to a book that might just be that, and I have to read it, and I'll let you guys know in a month.
Okay.
But in the meantime,
Well, just before you do, let's not forget, we told already, and we should put it in the show notes, the story of a guy who got so hammered he took a castle, he took a fort on his own, and that's one of my. There you go. That's one of my favorite stories about the Fort Budge
yes,
Budge.
this was our pilot episode, which I
Yeah.
encourage everyone to go back and listen to. It wasn't a visual one, it was audio, but that's why I wrote on my little notepad here, Budge Budge, because of the able seaman who took the fort on his own because he'd had too much to drink.
Yeah.
All back.
Great.
So we got another great story, but I just want to
Yep.
remind everyone in the meantime of our sponsor, the Wolf Project, super high-end men's beauty products. Alex and I both use the eye roller. And actually, you're looking pretty good given that you have an infant that doesn't sleep all that much.
Yeah.
And I do want to make one thing clear though, because we kind of screwed this up in the past, and I apologize to people who tried to do this. There is a discount code, which is the letter H, the number 4, and the word 20 spelled out, that works on the wolfproject.co website. It does not work in Nordstrom if you show up in the United States or in Amazon UK, but it does work on their website. And many of the items are backlogged and out of stock because I guess the company is that successful. But the eye roller that Alex and I both use is available, and you can get 20% off with the code. And with that said, Alex, what's next?
All right, I'm going to tell one of my favorite stories from the first book. And this story is called There's No Place Like Home. Thomas Pellow, who was from Cornwall, was 11 years old when he was serving in the summer of 1715 as a cabin boy on a ship captained by his uncle. They had sailed across the Bay of Biscay and they reached Cape Finisterre when they were captured by Barbary pirates. Pirates are pirates they, and cheers to pilots, pirates.
Pilots, pirates.
There you go. Side note, these were perhaps the most successful pirates in history. Post-independence from Great Britain, when we had our little disagreement, threats to American shipping posed by the Barbary Corsairs were in part directly responsible for the formation of the US Navy. So that's pretty consequential. Right. So Pellow became a slave of Sultan Moulay Ismail ibn Sharif. And the Sultan, I think it's fair to say, was not renowned for his kindness. On one occasion, the story goes, a bit like Stalin, I think, who told jokes against himself about how bad he was. I'm imagining the Sultan was quite fond of these stories. The Sultan came with his army to a river where there was no convenient place to cross. So, having prisoners with him, he ordered
Oh,
them killed and their bodies lashed together and fashioned a bridge from their bodies. So that's who Thomas belongs to as a slave. He goes to age 11, right? That's your master. And the Sultan gave Thomas to his son, Moulay Sfar, and he promptly tortured Thomas to get him to convert to Islam. This was, I'm afraid, a rather short-lived success for Moulay because the Sultan ordered that Thomas should be sent to learn Arabic. And when his son Moulay, who obviously had other ideas for this slave, refused to obey said order, the Sultan had his son killed on the spot in front of Thomas. Now, I think that's probably quite an instructive setup. Bridges made from the lashed together bodies of your prisoners, guy who will kill his own son immediately when he refuses a relatively trivial order. So, point is, you don't really want to say no to this guy. And when the Sultan asked Thomas if he would like to become a soldier, Pello said, "Do you know, I have dreamt of nothing more than becoming a soldier in your army. And do you know, as it happens, I think I should learn Arabic as well. I think that's a very good idea. Why don't I learn Arabic and become a soldier?" And so he swiftly becomes a leading light in the Sultan's elite fighting corps, which is made up of European slaves, people they've captured from Europe and pressed into service. Impressment, there's a callback. And
fair.
most of these people, like him, had been seized as children and raised in an indoctrinated system. We have, I'm afraid, sadly, child soldiery with us to this day. And we have people who are brought into these systems, often drugged and forced to take substances ranging from alcohol to a far great deal worse, totally indoctrinated in the systems in which they exist. And Pello was an early, I suppose, precursor of this. He fought in 3 campaigns. He often led his fellow slaves into battle. And on one occasion, he led a slave capturing expedition himself. So that's how far along you go. He's, on the one hand, trapped in the system, on the other hand, indoctrinated in it. He goes off and, in a pyramid scheme of slaves, goes and captures others to become slaves of the Sultan himself. But he nevertheless eventually escapes upon a ship that was bound for Gibraltar, then, as it is now, proudly British. And when he arrived in Gibraltar, he was initially barred from disembarking by the British authorities because he was taken to be a Barbary pirate, which, in a manner of speaking, he was, because he had spent 23 years of his life in captivity and in service to the Sultan. And on his return home to Cornwall, he could not recognize his own parents. And for their part, they only, inverted commas, recognized him because they'd been told that his return was impending. He was an alien in the land from which he had longed to which he had longed to return for some 2 decades, and he likely felt more at home in the land from which he devoutly wished to flee. And the lesson I think we take from Thomas Pello's story is a very hard one. Home is not always home. And harder still, sometimes, no matter how much we wish it to be different, there is no home.
Yeah, sobering. Unlike the crack and rum, it is
Unlike the
sobering.
Kraken River.
I want to make 3 points about this. Another great story, although
That's a
so
saddie, huh? It's a
yeah,
super saddie. Taken at
exactly.
11.
Yeah. And I'm going to work from the most sad and serious to the least sad and serious so we can end on a happy note. First point is absolutely no defense of slavery is possible, period, full stop. However, one of the things this reminds us of is that our ancestors, the Brits, the Americans, same ancestors, did not invent the concept. And there were African tribes that sold other Africans into slavery. There's been a very long and unbroken to this day tradition of slavery in the Islamic world. And it's always wrong, no matter who does it. And I just think it's really important for people to have the historic context. You might recall, Alex, I served as a pro bono general counsel for a couple of years to the Polaris Project, which is the largest U.S. anti-human trafficking organization. And they estimated, this was in 2014-ish, that there are more human beings in slavery today than in all of human history.
You're kidding.
No, sex
That's
slavery
a.
and what people don't talk about,
I
labor
see.
slavery.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if those numbers are right, but it's
I.
bad. It's still
I'm
bad.
sorry, Brian. I'm conscious I talked over you there for 1 second. You said a second kind of slavery. What was that?
Well, labor
You did
slavery
labor slavery.
and
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
sex slavery. So most people think of human trafficking, they think of sex slavery, which is a big, huge, horrible thing. But there's also a gigantic international set of operations around labor slavery. In fact, I haven't checked this recently, but as of a couple of years ago, you could find live streams of human slave auctions in Syria.
You're kidding.
No, as of at least 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know about today. So
Yeah.
that's the super serious part. The kind of
Before you, I just want to give a book recommendation, which
yeah,
is Damascus Station, which I thought was a great read. It's not about slavery, but it is about Damascus, and it seemed particularly pertinent given relatively recent events. So go ahead.
100%. I'll check that one out. Um, Still serious, but not as humanly horrible, is about the Barbary Pirates and about American history. As a law of war scholar and a constitutional lawyer, many of the principles of international law of armed conflict and also the power of the American presidency stem from President Thomas Jefferson's completely unauthorized at the beginning war that he launched against the Barbary pirates in Tripoli in 1803 or whatever. Don't hold me to
From the shores of Montezuma to the halls of Tripoli.
Yep, that's the U.S. Marine Corps hymn, and that's the reason it's there. Now, on a totally non-serious point, I have actually never seen the classic comedy Cabin Boy, but it seems relevant to this story. So if somebody wants to go out and watch it and give us a movie review next time, that would be great.
That would be great. And you're right about because I mean, involvement in the slave trade is inexcusable, but it does bear mentioning that almost all of some of the capturing of slaves by Europeans was done along coasts, but most of it was done by buying them from chiefs in Africa, where they were delivered to ports, and there were negotiations over how many slaves would be sold. African slaves would be sold to the Europeans by other Africans.
Yeah, I worked briefly on a screenplay, which I don't think ever got made, so I'm not going to say too much about it. But it was a true story about an African who became an actual big hero in the United States in the anti-slavery movement, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't know if the IP is still out there. But the key part of the story is that particular African, and I'm not naming a country name because I don't know what the names of the countries were in the early 1800s. He was sold to Western slavers by his brother.
By his brother.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I just told a story about a guy killing his own son because he
Yeah.
refused a ridiculously small request. So I suppose I shouldn't be that shocked, but gosh, his own brother.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give folks a little preview of what's coming up, we've got a couple of great guests coming up this
Yeah.
fall. We have a great entire story about rum that we're going to have a guest for. Got a couple authors coming on. It's going to be great. Alex and I will be together in the UK and the fall. Maybe we'll try to do something from there. And stay tuned, everybody. Hidden History Happy Hour. Cheers.
Cheers.